You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Mathew Meyer is an attorney who volunteers for the employer support of the Guard and Reserve. He also won a Volunteer of the Year award from the Department of Defense in 2010. Matthew, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure being here.
Tell us about the ESGR and how does the organization help Guard and Reserve members?
Well, ESGR stands for Employer Support of Guard and Reserve. It's a Department of Defense program set up in 1974 specifically to encourage support of employers of our Guard and Reserve members. Traditionally, there has been a concern that as the defense of the nation shifted more to the Guard and Reserves, that employers who hire those service members, the Guard and Reservists, need to be recognized, that they need to be encouraged somewhat in supporting their Guard and Reservists because they serve as well as their employees do. Oftentimes there is certain burdens that are put upon employers under federal statute, specifically USERRA, which is the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And as the name suggests, it requires reemployment of service members after they are activated for training or deployments or whatever. And there are some detailed requirements under the Act, and it does put a lot of burden on employers. So the Department of Defense, actually Congress established the ESGR under the Department of Defense in order to recognize those employers who really go above and beyond in supporting their Guard and Reserve employees. We also educate employers and service members as to what their rights and obligations are under the statute. And traditionally, the third part of our mission has been to provide mediation services. As an attorney, I am trained to mediate disputes that may arise between an employer and a service member employee.
When did you get involved with the ESGR and what drew you to the organization?
Well, as a veteran myself, I was a Marine sergeant during the 80s. I've always had an affinity towards the military, and especially after 9/11, many of us were looking for what opportunities were out there to help our service members. I was a little too old to re-enlist, and as an attorney, I thought that I could use my skills better by providing mediation services through the ombudsman function of the ESGR, and also just to assist reserve component service members and actually veterans as well in dealing with civilian employers, civilian employment, and unemployment issues as our mission has evolved.
What makes the transition from military to civilian life so challenging, particularly in the employment arena?
It is a burden on their employers when they have to hire a replacement, and then once a service member returns from deployment, they have to reemploy them at what's called an escalator position and provide benefits, and it burdens those particular employers. And unfortunately, I think that there are some employers out there who are aware, maybe they do it subconsciously, but they are aware of some of the burdens that they face in hiring a reserve component service member and may, in their initial hiring decision, decide not to. There are other issues, particularly with the active duty veterans, and I have personal experience with this. After serving 6 years in the Marine Corps, 3.5 years of which was overseas, it was difficult to make that transition from the military, a completely different culture, to the civilian world, and especially civilian employment.
Nationwide, the unemployment rate for returning veterans is much higher than that of the general population. Do you see the same trend in Minnesota, and what can we do to address that issue?
Yes, it is certainly here. As a matter of fact, the last survey, I believe it was last year, specifically looking at the disparity between the civilian unemployment rate and the veteran unemployment rate, was the third highest among all of the states, with, I believe, only Indiana and Michigan being higher. Ultimately, what we want to do is to, one, educate employers as to what value these veterans and these service members can bring to their workplaces. I think that there is a certain misunderstanding as to what these veterans can bring to the workplace, and there's an educational component. But there's also the employee side, the veteran side, where we need to connect them up with the employers who are willing to give them a chance. The Beyond the Yellow Ribbon program is instrumental in encouraging community support, identifying those employers who are veteran friendly, who do value what veterans can bring to the workplace. And then at the national level with the ESGR program and the Employment Initiative program through the h2h.jobs website. So there are a lot of resources to try to close the gap, but there is certainly a huge gap between the civilian and the veteran unemployment rate. And quite frankly, it impacts most the 18 to 24 year old range of the post 9/11 veterans group. There are a number of ways, whether it is through education, whether it is through incentives to the employers, or whether it is through just making the veteran employee more marketable to prospective employers. We're addressing all of those particular factors in trying to combat the high unemployment rate among veterans.
Mathew Meyer is a Minneapolis-based attorney who volunteers with the employer support of the Guard and Reserve. Mathew, thanks so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
Thank you, Jim.
That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. Please join us again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.